Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jaycie Loewen today. And just in the way of a short bio, Dr. Jaycie is a Howard Hughes Medical Institute scholar who graduated from the University of Utah with a PhD in neuroscience and an MS in clinical investigation. Her early work focused on researching epilepsy models and anticonvulsant strategies, leading to the discovery of interactions that could be targeted for seizure treatments. As a clinical neuroscientist at a brain injury clinic, she oversaw research concerning treatments for brain injury symptoms. Dr. Loewen has had a long-standing love of nutrition and the concept of food as medicine, and combines her experiences as a researcher, educator, and clinical specialist to inform diverse audiences about the brain-gut connection. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Jaycie Loewen.
All right, so we'll be checking the audio. So as Lori so lovely introduced me, so I want to quickly just start out with some disclosures. I currently work at Seton University over in beautiful New York. And I also like to start with a little bit of a general background as far as why am I here? Why are you listening to me, a neuroscientist, talk about nutrition? So my background in epilepsy was really looking at pharmacologics. But as part of that, I was lucky enough to be part of several initiatives looking at dietary interventions for epilepsy. So when I say the word ketogenic diet, many of you are probably going to think like, oh, it's that weight loss diet, right? Well, the origins of that diet are actually in treatments for epilepsy. It was used for pediatric epilepsy in patients with very severe life-threatening epilepsy and actually reduced seizures in those patients. So food as medicine has been with us for a very long time. And I'm really delighted to be talking to you about the brain-gut axis, or it can also be called the gut-brain axis. I might use those two interchangeably. And we'll have some fun during this presentation. All right. As with all talks, you should start off with objectives, but I like to break them down. So first of all, these are the components with which I want you to be able to go at the end of the presentation. I learned this. I know this. It's a long list, though. So if we're going to break it down even more, I want you to come away from this talk with A, tips and tricks that you can use in your own life to support your gut, your brain, and the interaction between them. And secondly, I want you to be able to teach someone else about the microbiome when you leave. All right, so before we get to the gut microbiome, we have to start off with the human microbiome. So you may wake up in the morning, look in your mirror and go, this is me, aren't I beautiful and wonderful? And you are, but you're not alone in that mirror. You have trillions of little buddies hanging out with you, microbes. They are in your eyes, they are on your skin, they are in your blood. And that might seem a little icky at first, but I want you to think of those microbes as a suit of armor. It is your protection, your defense. It works with your immune system to make sure that you are happy and healthy and functioning. If you did not have those buddies, you wouldn't be alive. So when you're looking at this image, I want you to take away that, first of all, if you look at the very top there, up at that beautiful brain, there are parts of the body where we're still a little uncertain about whether we have commensals or microbes that help us exist and survive. This actually makes sense with the brain. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's kept very separate from the body simply because of how important it is as an organ. But there may be research in the future finding commensals in our central nervous system. So put a pin in that, keep your eyes out for the next couple years. I was commenting to Lori that this is actually the perfect time to be giving this kind of presentation because within the past year, even less, just within the past month, several seminal papers have been published on the brain-gut connection. All right, a couple of other things you'll notice. We have commensals in our lungs, and then if you're going to the bottom of that image, you're going to notice parts of the GI system. And I always like to leave with, do not forget that we also have microbes in our reproductive systems as well, because I will be mentioning why that's important. All right. A quick summary. First and foremost, when you think of these microbes, they're not just bacteria. They are viruses. They're even sometimes parasites that live and habitate with us. There are many varieties. We'll be looking at a couple. I don't expect you guys to be able to go, oh, this is a lactobacillus at the end of this talk, but I do want you to take away an appreciation for the diversity that lives with us, and that diversity is important. Second of all, this microbiome comes from our mothers. So when we are birthed vaginally, that microbiome that is in the reproductive tract actually is provided to the baby and serves as their first suit of armor. Now, as some of you might know, and this is a little icky, maybe for some of you, but maybe some, OB, you're in the OB spectrum, maybe labor and delivery nurse, you'll know that mothers can sometimes have a bowel movement during pregnancy. It's theorized that that actually may be a good thing because it provides additional microbes for that child to then take in to their microbiome. Everything has its purpose, even the gross stuff. All right, and finally, it changes as we do. It is, right now, your fingerprint, and it looks like no one else's, but that fingerprint doesn't stay the same. Depending on your age, depending on your hormones, depending on what you eat, it is constantly adapting. Now, this is great, actually. So if you move from one part of the country to another, you're going to want your microbiome to be like, okay, what do we need to protect against now? But as we're going to be discussing, those alterations can also go hand in hand with disease, and especially mental health struggles. All right, the gut in numbers. So first of all, I want you to imagine that I have a hose running across this room. It's about yay big around, let's say. Now I want you to imagine that I take a scalpel and I run it down that hose and I lay it out flat. That is the exposure point in your gut between you and the outside world. So as you're breathing in, you're swallowing, you're eating, you're bringing things into your system that are then coming into contact with you and your microbiome. That is a huge amount of surface area. It is massive. And so that is your battlefield. That is what your body is wanting to basically preserve. You don't want anything bad getting into your system. And so, again, if you're going to take away anything from this slide, is that interface is very, very large. All right, so we eat a ton of food throughout our lifetime. We put a lot of food into our bodies. Some of it is delicious and wonderful. Other times we are running to class and we get a Snickers bar and we look at it and we're like, well, this is breakfast and lunch for today. All right, I mentioned this before, but it is a collection of several hundred different types. We're not going to go through all of these, but what is key about this is that the diversity of our microbiome relates directly to how good it is at protecting us. So if you have lots of different types that are working together as a community, you have a good, strong microbiome. If you have a microbiome that only has a few types, then you're not going to have a good suit of armor against those invaders and things that are trying to get into our body. All right. Couple quick functions. So first of all, metabolism. We may think of our GI system as well. Food goes into my mouth, and then I masticate it, I break it down, then I swallow it, it goes into my gut, it's into my stomach, it's broken down more, goes through my intestines and comes out the other side. We need to kind of change that thinking a little bit because alongside us eating is our microbes eating. It is helping us break down that food. It is actually producing lovely things like short-chain fatty acids that I'll talk about later. But again, when you're thinking about that metabolism, that breaking down, your microbes are doing just as much work, if not more than you are. Absorption. Again, yet another thing. We're like, oh yeah, just vitamins and minerals go right in my body. No. There is a very complex set of things that need to happen in order for you to absorb certain things, and the microbiome is very key in that. All right, third, protection. I've already talked about this. We've got that suit of armor, but I want you to remember that our immune system and these commensals, rather than butting heads, are actually communicating and collaborating to protect you. All right, symbiosis. I love this word. So these microbes actually communicate support and feed the cells of our gut. They're kind of like nannies. Our gut cells are, they're already working so hard for us. It's nice to have that extra layer of protection, to have those helpers to make sure that we have a nice, strong gut. And thereby, later on, we're going to talk about how that helps the brain. Let's walk through an example. So, some of these will look familiar. Some of you might love broccoli and almonds, others might not. But the common factor is that these have very complex carbohydrates in them, very good complex carbohydrates. But with complex carbohydrates comes the word complex. We actually can't break down some of the components of these foods. So does it just exit our system? It doesn't. We have these microbes in our GI system that will actually break these down and give us SCFAs, short-chain fatty acids. There will be an acronym later, I'll repeat it, but just kind of try to get that word in there, short-chain fatty acids, that then go on to support the cells that line our gut. These cells then go on to do a very important function, which again, sometimes I repeat myself when it's important, but we'll come back to that later. Now, this is so cool. So the GI microbiota actually have their own enzymes. So enzymes that we're not producing, they are uniquely producing. And these enzymes can actually help us synthesize certain vitamins. And these vitamins, as you'll read up there, they look pretty important, do they? They are things that are necessary for life and health. So if all of this is working properly, if we are getting those complex carbohydrates and those fibers, if our microbiome is nicely structured and diverse, we're getting the end result of a healthy gut with cell walls that are, if you look up at that little diagram of the smiling cells up there, those tight junctions are nice and preserved. We have this barrier against pathogenesis and against infection. Everything's nice and happy. Now, if we go the opposite way, and I'll go a little faster on this one, what happens if we're not getting those resources? What happens if maybe our diet, we're so busy, our diet is mostly of foods that might not have a lot of fiber? Well, what's going to happen is that those GI microbes are not going to be able to produce as many of those short-chain fatty acids, and thereby, little frowny face, cells aren't going to be as happy. But, and possibly more concerning, is that we aren't going to get as many of those enzymes to help us synthesize those vitamins. And at the end of the day, what that is going to cause is an unhappy gut. A gut that might have leaky cell walls, a gut that may suffer from constipation, diarrhea, etc. And obviously this is something we want to prevent just in general. All right, oops. So, let's talk about some external factors. So we just talked about a component of our diet, but it's a lot more complicated than that. So when we're considering our gut and factors that can influence how our gut functions, you can see this list here. What I want you to take away from that list as you're reading it is, I don't have control over a lot of these. I don't have control over my genetics. I don't have control over the pollution levels in my city. Yet all of these things go together to affect how our gut functions. So one of the ultimate lessons that I want you guys to take away from at the end of this presentation is that this is a scale. So we have all of these things possibly working against us. We need to find ways and things that can help stabilize that scale. And so you'll get some tips on that later on in the presentation. All right. More than just digestion, what does that mean? A word that I want you guys to remember is called dysbiosis. Essentially, it means disruption in that microbiome, in that gut. We talked a little bit about the resilience of microbiota. So when we're thinking about these things that can affect the microbiome, let's say detrimentally, we need to think about things that may lower that diversity. And so maybe some of you students are going like, what could that be? Wait, things like antibiotics, for example. So medications that could lower that diversity and affect our gut. And I want you to maybe percolate, think on some other things that might affect that, because those are going to be the things that we target to stabilize that balance. Very briefly, let's discuss what clinically defines a healthy or unhealthy gut. And by that I mean, I'm going to say there really is no good, definitive, this is what's a healthy gut, this is what isn't. partially because we are constantly in flux. You know, we could have gas one day and then it goes away and that's just normal. Humans get gas. We could have constipation one day and then not have it another. Those of us in the room with certain chromosomes, we know that sometimes the whole system is whacked out. Not something we could control. But here's just a few tips and tricks, a few things to look out for. Whereas if you're starting to present more of the unhealthy signs, that may be indicating that your gut is kind of leaning into that more dysbiosis versus biosis would be the on the healthy side. Just to maybe mention a couple that you may not have thought of. One big one is actually skin issues. This is actually becoming more discussed on social media. But things like acne, rashes, itching, dry skin can actually be related to biosis or dysbiosis. And some individuals have found benefits in their skin quality by maybe eating more of certain foods or less of other foods. Let's see. Well, we're going to talk about mood later, so I won't go into that. But maybe let's talk a little bit about cravings. Cravings are completely normal. Some days we just want something and we're, Thai food. It's like, yep, Thai food is for dinner. We're going to get that. But sometimes cravings, especially when they are abnormal, when they may be affecting your quality of life, may be an indicator that your gut is not happy. It's searching out either a certain nutrient or maybe searching out an accommodative nutrient, something to just fill the place of something that you ultimately need. So pay attention to if you're experiencing abnormal needs for certain foods or for liquid. All right, the brain. So this is a presentation where I'm going to talk the least amount about the brain that I ever have. I think I have 3 slides in total, which is very abnormal. But if you have questions about the brain, I would be more than happy to chat about it more. So, as you might know, it is our central processor. It allows us to move, to think, to sit here and pay attention. Obviously very important. And because it is so important, it is actually very kept apart from multiple other parts of the body. So for example, you think of your immune system, how it helps you fight off infection, get rid of that virus. It may, for example, detect there's something on your skin, and you've got all of these lovely immune cells that are going to help protect that barrier. The brain doesn't get defended by the immune system of the body. It has its own restricted immune system. It also has something called the blood-brain barrier, where it is essentially like this iron wall that separates that central nervous system and separates that blood flow. So it's a little bit of a little alien in the box up here, just kind of sitting, hanging out, helping us do everything, but ultimately that king on high that really doesn't interact with anything below it, for the most part. All right, give and take relationship. So let's do a little thought experiment. What I want you to think about is what happens when maybe you've had a really stressful time. It's midterms, for example, or maybe you've got 300 quizzes to grade. What could that cause to you physically? Well, let's walk through it. Maybe disrupted sleep. Maybe your iWatch is going, hey, your heart rate's a little higher than normal. And those things in isolation are a natural part of the stress response. Also part of the natural stress response might be changes in GI function. So here's where we have that stress then leading to a change in possibly that biosis balance. But it can also go the other way. There is research suggesting that certain, for example, neurodegenerative conditions actually start in the gut and may be part of a causative factor for eventually us developing Parkinson's, dementia, etc. So we have to think back and forth, and obviously if I'm drawing an arrow up this way and then I'm drawing an arrow that way, it's a circuit. So we need to find places in that circuit to make sure that feed forward and feedback signaling is good both ways. All right, the limbic system. So this is the main circuitry for your emotions. So let's walk through the different parts. So the thalamus. The thalamus is key for things like sleep, for example, for filtering out sensory information, like how much visual information is actually getting into your visual cortex, or how much auditory information is making it into your auditory cortex. This is actually very, very important because let's take this room, for example. I hear a ticking on one side, we've got shuffling, we've got movements. Imagine if your brain couldn't filter out all that information, you'd never sleep a wink. It'd drive you absolutely crazy. This is actually something we saw in our brain injury patients, is that they would often have hyperacusis, for example, as a result of brain trauma that affected the functioning of the thalamus. Then we have our hypothalamus. You should be thinking hormones, for example. You should be thinking things like body temperature. So this is an extremely important brain area right underneath the thalamus that also interacts directly with what's called our autonomic nervous system. I will go into that later. But for you that are like, wait, I had a bio class that talked about that. It's your fight or flight and your rest and digest system, that ANS. Our amygdala, that one most of you will probably know. That center that has to do a lot with fear, maybe anger. That is part of our limbic system, stress too. And then our hippocampus, which is our main memory hub. It is the organ, the part of your brain that's going to allow you to step out of this room and have put some information into your short-term memory, which will then migrate to your long-term memory. So a year from now, if you've got somebody going, what is this microbiome thing? You're like, wait. It's that lady at Saddleback. What does she call that microbiome? All right. Oh, something to mention, and this is a talk for another day, but the limbic system, we like to think about emotions, but it also is very involved in our motivations. I'm not going to feel motivated if my system is in fight or flight. I'm not going to want to study for a test. I'm not going to want to explore new hobbies. I'm going to be in lockdown mode. So when we're discussing tips and tricks that you want to take away from this, also remember that it's okay to be unmotivated. It is your body's reaction to a certain situation. So we have to learn little digestible things that even in your worst state you can unlock and use to help improve your mental and physical health. All right, autonomic nervous system. So on the left side, we have the parasympathetic division. So parasympathetic, that is your rest and digest, and innately within that name, we're thinking gut. So it, when you eat, provides rich blood flow to that GI system, which is necessary for those smooth muscle cells to work really well, move food through. It is also involved in things like respiration, pupillary dilation, constriction, etc. It is also involved in slowing your heart rate down. So let's do a quick little experiment in this room. So what I want you to do is I want you to change your breathing pattern with me. I want you to take in basically 4 seconds of air and then exhale for 5 or 6. Now what you're going to notice is that it's difficult, especially the exhale. You might fully exhale everything and then be like, I don't have anything left for the last 4 seconds. So just know that it might be a little bit difficult if this is the first time you're doing it. So everybody together, so we're going to do 4 in and then 6 out. Okay, so if you continued, what was happening during that process is that as you were inhaling, your heart rate was actually increasing very slightly, and as you were exhaling, your heart rate was slowing. Now imagine if you kept doing that for a couple minutes. What would happen is that, let's say your heart was a little bit high, you're trying to remember all this information, maybe if you have hyperacusis, the sounds in this room are driving you a little crazy. That exercise would have lowered your heart rate. And when your heart rate lowers, your body is recognizing this is a safer space. I can be a little bit more relaxed. I've always found this absolutely fascinating because we're taught in anatomy and physiology that cardiac muscle is not under voluntary control, and that's true, except it isn't. So we have little tips and tricks like this that we can actually use to slow our heart rate. So this is something for whether you're talking to family or whether you're talking to patients, for example. Maybe you've got a patient that's just really nervous about that visit. Do this kind of exercise with them. It's something that they control, something that they can use to distract themselves, and something that will engage that parasympathetic nervous system. On the opposite end, we have our sympathetic division. The way that I remember this is I always think, oh, this side is sympathetic to me running away from a bear. This raises your heart rate. This takes blood away from your gut, and where is it going to send it? Those muscles for you to fight or flight. Now, that name is really great for remembering what it does, but if you have a little mental space, I want you to insert a different name, and that name is your activation system. It's just helping you get things done. It is helping you work out. It is actually helping sending blood flow to your brain so that you can think quicker. So it is very sympathetic to the needs that we have in that moment. You know, fight or flight kind of makes you think like, oh, this is only a stress system. It's not just a stress system. All right. Finally, we are here, the gut-brain axis or the brain-gut axis. It is a critical line of communication. So you've got telephone wires going from here to here, and they are on all day, all night. There are many different kinds of signals that might be sent between. So we have neural signals. So for example, as part of that parasympathetic division, we have something called the vagus nerve or the wandering nerve, cranial nerve number 10, that actually wanders its way down to actually interface with that gut. So we tend to forget that central nervous system can actually stretch out and interface with multiple parts of our body. But then we can also have endocrine, immune, humoral, and other signals that these two use to communicate with each other. This, as an aside, makes research incredibly difficult about the gut microbiome. So for those, just kind of an introduction to research, you need your control group. So let's say that I divide you guys up, one half versus the other, and I have one half of you do that breathing exercise, and then I have the other half not do it, so you're the control group. And then I look at your heart rates and I see, all right, this side of the room, their heart rate has decreased. It's never going to work like that. What's going to happen is that maybe on this side of the room I have patients with heart conditions where their heart rate it's not going to be influenced by that breathing. Maybe you're on a medication that's naturally just going to keep your heart rate up, and that breathing exercise isn't enough to get it down. So then I might do my statistics and I go, oh wait, there's no difference. When it comes to the gut-brain axis, each one of those words, neural, endocrine, immune, humoral, and possibly others, which we don't know the number there, those are all variables that researchers are having to account for when they're doing research. These factors, as we discover them, are also the reason that there have been some redactions. There's been some papers that have been essentially unpublished because they found a conflicting factor in those papers. So again, this is the year to do this kind of presentation because we're finally coming out with very large clinical studies that are now bolstered by years and years of research figuring out all of these variables. All right. As you're here to learn, the gut-brain axis influences our emotions. Now, when I gave a lecture similar to this earlier, a couple of years ago, this sometimes can be a little scary. So a student that I had a conversation with actually had a very serious case of Crohn's disease. And so she saw this and she's like, I'm done for. I have no control. I can't even control when I go to the bathroom. That's not what you want to take away from this. What you want to take away is that our bodies are amazing at adapting, and the more tools you give your body to adapt, the better you will do. So I'll go through those tips and tricks later, but again, when you're seeing that message up there, I want you to think of your body as working for you. It's not, your gut's not trying to attack you. Other parts are going to come in and help. So just an aside. All right, let's talk about specifics. So rather than read through all of these, I want you to think about, for example, your brain is hungry and it's on the search for food. It's on that way to that Thai restaurant. What's going to happen in your gut? So your brain is sending signals. I am doing this. I am motivated to go find food. You'll have changes in mucus production, for example. But what about the opposite? So you've just eaten that meal. Your stomach is sensing a stretch, and it is sending signals back up to your brain going, no more, we are good, we are satiated, we have the nutrients that we need. So with this roundabout cycle, where there's a reciprocal relationship. All right. I'll talk about more of that later. All right, I love this figure. This is a paper that came out, I believe, in February of this year. It is on the citation list. I would recommend giving it a read. It is beautifully written, and the figures are just stunning. So when we're talking about this interaction between the gut and the brain, I'm actually going to focus first on the middle part, which is the metabolites. So when we're thinking about chemical messengers, we're usually thinking about the big ones, like the neurotransmitters, the very complex molecules that help us do everything that we do. Some signals are very tiny. It could be an influx of magnesium into your gut and then into your circulatory system. It could be, this is outside of the scope of this presentation, but it could even be something as simple as salt entering your bloodstream. All of these things are potential messengers. I absolutely adore the immune system. I wish I could do a whole presentation on it. We're not going to do that. But when you are thinking about the interaction between your gut microbes and your immune system, those things, those transport and those inflammatory signals are actually recognized by those microbes. And here's a really cool aside. You may be thinking, how is that possible? How in the world can I have a different being in my gut that recognizes my signals? There's a paper that came out, I think it was about 7 years ago, that posed a beautiful question, which is, what if these evolved with us? We get them from mom. She probably has some from her mom. She has some from her mom. Could these have actually evolved with us? I would think yes, that makes the most sense. Because of this very complex relationship, there has to be a long-standing understanding between the two populations. So I just love that thought that this armor has been with us for millennia, and it is adapting right now, especially to our modern lives, to these new foods that our bodies could have never conceptualized eating, like, for example, fake sugars. It's a metabolically kind of neutral, there's no calories, our mouths can taste it, but these microbes are going, what is this? I've never seen this before. And that can be for good or for worse. All right, let's see. So when we're considering that gut microbiome, I mentioned that certain diseases we're finding correlates in the gut, possibly causative aspects in the gut. And I focused more on neurodegenerative conditions, but as some of you may know who are working with, for example, individuals on the autism spectrum disorder, we often see gut conditions with them. And there's been theories that, well, many individuals with autism have specific sensory needs and preferences, and maybe they're not eating the foods that they should be. But it actually might be that their gut is already in a state of dysbiosis, and that is simply contributing to the issue. All right. We talked a little bit about motivation, but since it's up here on the slide, I'll talk a little bit about just physical status. You all know that if you eat well, it does good things for your body. When I think about physical movement, I think about when I was in undergrad and I was part of the diving team. And me and a girlfriend got into a really interesting conversation. I was set up for a PhD long before, but we were talking about how she was like, I can't build muscle unless I'm eating a large amount of carbohydrates alongside the protein. And our coach, she didn't really talk about diet with us a lot, but our coach was like, I have no idea. Carbohydrates, proteins, you should be eating a lot of protein. Versus with me, my system, I was like, I tend to do a lot better performance-wise when I'm eating more protein. Carbohydrates just make me feel nice and sleepy. Everybody's needs are different. Everybody's needs are good. Even if that sometimes means you need a sugar hit before your test. Your brain loves glucose. Give it all those resources it needs. So when you're thinking about performance, whether mentally or physically, know that there's no perfect out there on the internet, it is the perfect that you figure out yourself. All right, we are zooming in right now. So if you remember that slide where we walked through those smiley gut cells, here they are a little bit more anatomically correct. So aspects about gut cells. First of all, they are very tightly associated to prevent anything from leaking in. We have goblet cells that produce mucus to both protect us as well as help with just moving food along through the gut. We have a very thick mucus layer that needs to stay there in order for your gut not to digest itself. And then we have within the lumen of the gut our commensals, our healthy gut microbiome. Now, starting with the left, some of these are going to look familiar. SCFAs, you should all be like short-chain fatty acids. We have fiber-degrading species. We have resistance to pathogens and infiltrators. That is a beautiful gut right there. Now, in dysbiosis, if you're starting at the top, we are ending up with those tightly associated cells not being as tightly associated. We're ending up with spaces where perhaps invaders could get through. We are ending up with these cells that aren't being supported. They're not getting those short-chain fatty acids. They're starving, they're hungry, they're cranky. And as a result, those goblet cells may not be able to produce as much mucus, as you can see in that slide. And then we have this case of dysbiosis. Now, as you're looking through this, you're like, wow, that's a lot of sciencey information. If you're going to focus on anything, I want you to go to the lower right corner where you are going to see sleep deprivation and age. Time does horrible things to us. We become much more beautiful in our age, but as some of us can tell, our gut can't handle things like maybe hot sauce as well as when we were younger. This is important because I fully believe we need to start taking care of our gut as soon as possible, because then it will age just as beautifully as we do. Again, there's certain things we don't have control over, but I like to think of, all right, my parents have certain, factors which they have noticed as they've aged. I need to be prepared to start doing some preventative action so that when I'm older, maybe my GI system will be able to handle those a little bit better. Sleep is so key to gut function. When we are asleep, our body is doing insane things. We could go through them all, but I want you to think of a couple, which is your parasympathetic and sympathetic are trading off. At one point, your body's heating up, your heart rate is going high. At another point, your heart rate is slowing, your temperature is dropping. And if you remember how important that vagus nerve is to your gut is throwing a party when you're sleeping. And it will actually help you sleep if it is taken care of. All right. So this is another way to look at it. I like to focus on the vagus nerve here a little bit more. So the vagus nerve, everything's connected, is actually very involved in our immune response as well. So let's go a little bit back in time to when I was talking about epilepsy. Some of you may know that vagus nerve stimulators are used to control seizures and are very effective in certain patients. Patients with epilepsy have GI issues, just like with patients with autism spectrum disorders and other comorbid conditions. And I actually was lucky enough to rotate with a doctor who patients would get their implant and then would come in and go, "Doc, you're not going to believe me." And she was like, "Try me." And they would say, "My digestion is fixed. What did it do? It's supposed to be influencing my brain, not my gut." It's like, no. These are connected. We had patients who had rashes and skin conditions that would start to clear up with that activation of that vagus nerve. Wild. All right. The vagus nerve is also very important in communicating how full or how hungry you are. It is, one of our messengers to secrete mucus. Now, we could talk about the nervous system all day, but I like practicals and takeawayables. So let's do another exercise. For those of you that have water, you came for a talk, you're going to leave with a show. I want you to gargle. I suck at it. Yep. See if you can, yeah. All right, I got some experts. You are activating your vagus nerve. Beautiful. 10 out of 10. So that muscle contraction, that movement, that vibration is activating your vagus nerve. Next thing, and I promise I can do this one, I want you to hum. You are activating your vagus nerve. So let's say you tend to notice that when you eat, it sits like a stone in your stomach. If you prime that vagus nerve, it's going to help that mucus secretion, it's going to help that movement, and it actually might help you be able to eat without feeling like, oh, the food just sits right there. It doesn't move really quickly. I'm super uncomfortable for long periods of time. But since the vagus nerve is also involved in our parasympathetic nervous system, it's also just going to help you relax. And it's easy. I mean, you're probably carrying around water bottles. You're not like me who can't function. But these are little tips and tricks, again, that you can take away, that you can give to your patients, to your family members, etc. We are getting to the core of this, diet, the GBA, and mental health. If there are any pharmacy students, forgive me, because the definition of drug versus medicine is very particular, so this isn't technically correct, but I like this phrase, which is food can be a type of medicine. It actually has been for many years and in many cultures, and I feel like we're losing a little bit of that, but yet at the same time we're regaining it. But food is something that we have to eat, so we might as well include it in our list of tips and tricks that can help us be happier and healthier. We can't always choose. Some of us may have allergies. We can't, maybe lactose intolerance, for example. Maybe peanuts make you sneeze. You don't have a big allergic reaction. You don't want to be sneezing all day, so avoid the Snickers bars. Some of us may have preferences, for example, for texture or taste. And so then a nutritionist may be like, this is the perfect food for you. And you're like, I will vomit. I cannot eat that food. I keep reiterating this because it is important. It is a two-way street. But for this, it is food and emotion. Many of us probably know this because when we get stressed, we might seek certain foods out that may be familiar. So because it is September, with September 11th, that awful day, what firefighters wanted was they wanted PB&Js. They wanted food that they had in their childhoods as a comfort when experiencing that. So you probably have also experienced this. You're wanting mom's, goulash. You're wanting dad's. My dad brought this cinnamon roll recipe that made my childhood. So sometimes it doesn't have to be healthy. Sometimes we just need that food as a comfort, and vice versa. Sometimes we need to include foods alongside that comfort food to make sure that we make it through that stressful situation. All right. Those words are going to look long and complicated. So I'm going to break this down. For those of you that are looking at that bottom panel, what we are looking at are species of different microbes and the neurotransmitters that they can influence. I don't want you to memorize that. What I want you to memorize, or somehow integrate into your learning set is, let's say we have personal life stress. It's going to cause an increase in norepinephrine in our system. That thereby is actually going to increase E. coli and jejuni infectiousness. That doesn't sound very nice, does it? Like, ooh, if I get stressed, I'm more prone to getting infected by these microbes? Ugh. Scarier yet, we actually have increased lactobacillus excretion. So some of you might know that when you have a bowel movement, you are actually excreting bacteria in addition to that digested food. So stress can actually remove these beneficial bacteria from your gut, and this has a slightly different effect in that it increases the colonization of exogenous bacteria. So obviously you're looking at that and it's like, I have to prevent stress at all costs. Again, that sympathetic nervous system is sympathetic to you. It is turning on that stress signal for a reason, but let's help it out a little bit. All right. So I like to include these with citations just because it's giving us an idea of the scope of what can affect our microbiome, but in more specific terms. So unfortunately, we are finding that pollution can affect our GI systems and cause dysbiosis. I know this sucks because we walk outside and we might see smog, or we might see smoke in the air. I lived in Utah, and we had the inversion, which was terrible. When I would go running, and I would have to wear a filter, otherwise I'd come home and feel like I smoked a cigarette. Ugh. Fake sugars. So sucralose and saccharin actually impair the glycemic response. Now, this was a revelation in the research community, because for our diabetic patients that may be having issues with gaining weight, we're telling them, hey, try artificial sugars. Well, now it's actually affecting their glucose responses in turn. Now, that's not to say that fake sugars are bad, but we may want to pay attention to how much of them we are consuming, and maybe, oh wait, I just realized if I have my coffee with Splenda in the morning, I end up gassy 2 hours later. I never put that together. That's what might be causing my gas. Let's try eliminating it. High-fat diets, and I should be very specific that these are typically diets that are not balanced, that do not include fats as well as other good components, and for the most part, these are trans fats. And then these can obviously lead to GI diseases, increased risk for cancer, etc., inflammatory diseases. So overall, not a great diet to be on. And lastly, medications. So we talked about antibiotics, but I want you to be thinking about proton pump inhibitors. I want you to be thinking about SSRIs. All of these can influence our gut. Little cool tidbit. So I think it was about 2 years ago, there was a seminal paper that came out saying, so SSRIs, good for our mood, right? They don't work on serotonin reuptake. They work through a mechanism we can't figure out, and some people are posing the idea of, well, the gut, 70% of our serotonin signaling happens in the gut. What happens if those medications are working here, not so much up here? So the jury's still out. Researchers love to argue. In the end of the day, we will come out with some wonderful research and ideas for the future. All right, so lactobacillus. When you see lactobacillus, immediately think yogurt, fermented foods. This specific species is probably the primary driver at this point, as far as we know now, with the connection between mental health and gut colonization. So it is in that army, it is the general standing at the head of the line. It has been found to be a psychobiotic, I love this word, which aids in stress resistance. So, for example, you should be immediately thinking, ooh, maybe I should put some yogurts into my daily routine. Though it's not all types of lactobacillus, so there may be strains which actually have a detrimental effect. But when you're buying things from the store, for example, they will list the beneficial species on there. And we have many, many different types of lactobacillus in our gut innately, and you can support them more with certain food strategies. So here we have like yogurt, kombucha, kimchi, for example. All right. So I'm going to stop talking for a moment. I want all of you to look at that very top, and I want you to figure out which is your diet. Where are you on that spectrum? And there's no judgment. It's just, where do we lie? And sometimes you could be on one end of the spectrum, and sometimes on the other end of the spectrum. But just get an idea of where you're at. All right. So where am I? I'm all over the place. Depends on how early I'm waking up to teach students. Sometimes the box is empty and then I get home and it's like, raid the fridge. So when we're looking at these different diets, some of these names will probably be familiar, like the Mediterranean diet, for example. This is considered one of the healthiest diets in the world. It focuses on very fiber-rich, very healthy oil-rich foods that are consumed. And you'll notice if we're working down that page that we actually, this beautiful paper by Ross et al. Breaks it down into lipids, which are in blue, carbohydrates in red, proteins in kind of that grayish green, and then alcohol in yellow. And you can see the ratios there. You can see there's a beautiful match between lipids and carbohydrates in that diet. Then if we move off to the right, we have the high fiber diet. Similar but not identical ratios there. But what I find absolutely fascinating is if you compare and contrast the different species of microbes under there, look at that. So we're still getting fiber, we're still getting all of these other things, but how is it that those diets are so differently influencing the microbes in our gut? And then if you look at the very bottom, it's going to talk a little bit about the benefits that that can have. So for example, in the Mediterranean diet, the short-chain fatty acid pathway is very much encouraged, versus if we're talking about the high-fiber diet, we do have that SCFA production increased, but we also have colon transport time is lowered. Basically, things move through your gut quicker. All right, so I don't want to spend too much time on this slide because there are a lot of terms that unless you're a microbiologist, you're probably not very interested in. But I would encourage, we're going to send out this video so you can have maybe a screenshot of this later, or please take a photo of it just to get an idea of kind of where you lie on that spectrum of diet. All right, so this paper that came out was revolutionary in a couple of ways, at least to me. So one of the ways is how simple and elegant the scientific design was. Second was how beautifully they treated the patients that went through this study. So what these researchers did is that they educated their population on diet. And in fact, there are prior studies that find a better relationship with your gut starts with education. So they sat these patients down, they assessed what they were eating, they assessed their mental health, and then they came up with a plan for these patients. So they implemented this plan, they reassessed, and what they found, so if we're looking at this in A, so their perceived stress scale in the controls pre and post was not significantly different. So we essentially saw that we're trying to give them like a fake diet, we're having them go through the motions, their stress stays about the same. And they don't know whether they've been given the real diet or the fake diet. Versus if we look at the actual diet group pre and post, we can see that there is a significant reduction in perceived stress. So again, these two populations that were tested didn't know which diet they were getting, but the one that was given this psychobiotic diet noticed a significant decrease in stress. And then they have also adherence score. So adherence is how well they applied the information that they were given, how well they stuck to that psychobiotic diet. And you can see that the higher the adherence score, actually that's flipped a little bit. But anyway, we can see that the relationship between the adherence score and the the perceived stress scale. All right, so what is the takeaway from this slide? Consumption of food was put into these really elegant kind of sections. So you want to have a specific amount of servings of these different components. Most importantly, you're going to notice that fermented foods were included in this. Now, fermented foods can be a little tricky. Some people may not like the taste of them. Especially when you end up with harsher components like, for example, kefir could be one where people get a lot of that scent of that fermentation, or kimchi, which I love, but some people may be like, absolutely not, it's gross. The main takeaway there is that it's fermented in some way. It could even be, very lightly fermented yogurt, which you can actually make on your own pretty easily. All right, so here we come to the crux, which is there are some that are very, very much in the camp of diet is the answer. Diet is the main cause. It's the reason that we're all stressed. And then you have the other camp, which is, no, it isn't a causative factor. It's a symptom. I tend to be in the middle as far as what I believe about the current understanding. And I'd like to invite you guys to go a little bit further, and let's walk through a different way to think about it. You are somewhere on this beautiful bell curve. Everybody's different. Everybody has different species living in their gut with different ratios. Everybody has different parents. Everybody has different ancestors. Everybody lives in a different place. So when you're thinking about your diet and your gut, it is unique to you. And when we're considering that beautiful nature versus nurture, it comes with a mental health roulette. So I add this here. It's not technically necessary, but I like to add that we can never be predictive with our mental health. Something catastrophic could happen tomorrow. Something wondrous could happen tomorrow. We have no control over it. But ultimately, that might lead to stress. Sometimes even, for example, let's say I'm running a surprise party for my sister tomorrow. I'm a perfectionist. It's going to stress me out. But then if I have a diet that's lacking sufficient nutrients, I'm going to end up with an unhappy gut, no matter what. Then that unhappy gut is going to contribute to that cycle, contribute to that stress. And that stress is then going to lead me to possibly eating foods that I am seeking at that point, but maybe not including foods that I should be really eating for my mental and physical health. And that's going to lead to an unhappy brain. That could lead to, for example, brain fog, perceived stress, as we discussed. It could lead to depressive-like symptoms. It could even aggravate pre-existing mental health conditions like PTSD, depression, anxiety, etc. Or even obsessive-compulsive disorder is another one. And that unhappy brain feeds back into the unhappy gut. And never forget that stress goes back into that roulette wheel. It seems like just a horrible situation. Now, if we take that, nature versus nurture, we take that mental health roulette, we take that stress, because it's just going to happen, and then we include those healthy, supportive components into our diet, it is going to protect us. It is going to protect our commensals. It's going to protect our mental health. It is going to then make it less so that we've got that feedback situation back into stress. We have a brain that's much happier. And ultimately, we are reducing that mental health's roulette ability to affect our brain. All right. The summary, the different way to think about it. Food is providing a protective balance. So it's not in the camp of it is the answer. It's not in the camp of it's not the answer. We don't even care about the answer. We care about the fact that it can support us. All right. Supporting factors, blood flow. So you probably don't want to hear this, but we should all be exercising. I don't know about anybody else, but after COVID, I used to run every day. It does not happen anymore. But we need exercise for our mental and physical health. There's a direct correlation there, and you don't have to do much, 15 minutes a day. In fact, if you're just walking between buildings, you're getting your blood flow up, that's actually really, really good for you. But find other ways. Find, for example, a lot of our patients, when I was working at the brain injury clinic, there are these, they're kind of like air-filled cushions, essentially, that you can put on chairs that kind of destabilize you, or they have yoga ball chairs that you'll actually engage your core because you're not fully stable. You're not kind of sunk into one of these stiff chairs here. You could have weights at your desk that you lift while you're reading emails, for example. You could get under desk, like they have these little mini bikes. Some people have found standing desks where you walk, all very supportive, all good for you. And we talked a little bit about blood flow when I was mentioning that parasympathetic nervous system encouraging blood flow to the gut. Well, exercise is just going to help that process. All right, sleep hygiene. Just a show of hands, who knows what sleep hygiene is? Okay. I didn't plan to do this, but I'll go over it a little bit more because it is so important. And then I'm going to send the moderators home with some resources that will be sent out with the video. But for now, sleep hygiene are the components which can help you get the best quality rest. So when I talk about rest, I mean not just sleeping, but the process by which you are getting ready for bed, you are in bed and sleeping, and the process by which you wake up and get to your fully activated state. So, couple tips and tricks for sleep hygiene. First of all, a good component of sleep hygiene is not having blue light on your phone. We'll talk a little bit about this, but just technology in general is horrible for sleep hygiene. And I'm guilty of it. Like, I'm answering emails when it's still dark out and I'm squinting at my phone in bed. My husband's like, turn down the light, Jaycie. It's just, technology has become attached to us, but it is really horrible for our sleep hygiene because it tricks our brain into thinking it's still daylight out. Another thing is the temperature of your room. You actually want it quite cool. I'm sorry for those who like to sleep at hot temperatures, but kind of the 65 range is perfect for your body because, as I mentioned, when you're asleep, Your body's doing all kinds of fun things. It's raising your temperature, it's dropping your temperature, so you want a nice temperature where your body's not fighting itself when you're going through those stages of that thermoregulation. Another component is you could, for example, eat things like dark cherries, for example, because they're heavy in melatonin. You could take a melatonin supplement just to kind of encourage, maybe when you're a little bit more stressed, encourage your body to go through a nice shutdown mode. You do not want to eat directly before bed. That should make sense because you don't want to have that heavy food baby sitting around when you're trying to get comfortable and relaxed. You could do vagus nerve activating activities like the humming or the gargling before you go to bed. And the last component, and as much as it breaks my heart, you need to consider who you're in bed with. If you're with a snorer, if you're with a pet that could be disturbing your sleep. I sleep with 4 cats. My husband dictated they sleep in the room, and I'm like, I've lost this fight. There was 1 rescue, and then 2, and then somehow there were 2 more. I think they just like binary fission, they just appear. All right, let's see. Yeah, I'll send out resources for the sleep hygiene, but those are a couple things to think about, especially when you're going to bed tonight. It's kind of like, oh, I can implement that. All right. As I mentioned, there is no perfect. Food needs life, light needs food, and add, not subtract. This is just a summary of what we've gone over before. I love summarizing. Okay, so I want you to read through this on your own, and again, it will be sent out. But I, as a scientist, always start with, we need a survey. Even before we come up with the question we're going to ask, we need to have an understanding of the playing field. So what gut symptoms do I have? What mental health symptoms do I have? What strategies have I already implemented? What strategies are not working for me? What medications am I taking? Do I have a current list? Am I taking them on time? What are the associations? Again, man, I always get gassy around noon. What could be causing that? In addition, always having an understanding of what backups we have for those super stressful situations. I want you to be thinking, who can I go to when things get really bad in my life? The second step is little by little. I see people all the time go, I'm going to overhaul my entire life all at once. You're setting yourself up to fail and fail badly, and you're going to feel bad about yourself. You're going to think it's your fault when in fact it's not. It's just not the way our brains and bodies work. So implementing techniques slowly is the way to do it. Finding a partner, maybe a friend, a colleague, and going, okay, we're both going to do this. We're going to remind each other. Maybe we'll actually go grocery shopping together. Maybe we'll send each other pictures of our food. Yes, I got my kimchi, and I'm liking it. And make it fun. All right. Quick list. I'm not going to focus on this because I'm already going a little bit over what I wanted to. We will talk about what ultra-processed foods means later on. All right. First of all, looking at this list, I'm going to circle poor sleep hygiene, which I do have. Then I'm going to circle fermented foods. How do I fit these together? Well, I'm going to write down in my diary, note to self, I am going to improve my sleep hygiene by making sure that my phone turns off my blue light at least a couple hours before I go to bed, because that blue light is that activating light. So it's going to help me a little bit. I might still be on my phone, but at least I don't have that stark daylight signal going into my brain. Next, fermented foods. Well, I can handle yogurt. I like yogurt. So I'm going to get some plain yogurt from the store. Well, I don't want to add my Splenda to it. That makes me gassy. So let's add in frozen strawberries and some honey to make it extra delicious. So now I've done 2 amazing things for my brain and my body, and I don't even have to remember the phone thing. That's automatic. And I already went to the store to buy my yogurt and my strawberries, and the first thing I do, I open my fridge and I go, oh, they're right front and center. Second, let's try fake sugars. So you guys will leave here understanding it affects your glycemic balance. And if you do have diabetes, for example, or maybe you're just trying to figure out how to be a little bit healthier, maybe lose a little bit of weight, and you're really trying to figure out that hunger balance, glycemic is very important for that. Then we add on maybe some breathing and relaxation exercises. So starting today, maybe switching out. Maybe you, instead of using that hyper sweet coffee stuff that they have at the cafeteria, I'm going to choose milk, or I'm going to choose half and half, and maybe I'll add some real sugar to it if I can. Maybe if I can't, I'll put some cinnamon in it instead. And then I'm going to really prioritize myself and take a break from my stressful job, from school, and implement some breathing times where I just get to go out in nature and sit, like today, everybody eating outside, getting nature, relaxing. That was perfect. All right, and the last one. Ultra-processed foods. I will give you a definition about this. And then a consistent medication routine. So ultra-processed foods are things where you look at that list of ingredients and you go, wow, that's long. And there are chemicals here that sound a little dangerous. Now, they're not dangerous, obviously. You're able to eat them. But they are foods that from their original state, from their flour or their salt or their vegetables, have been processed to the extreme to provide you the item that you are buying in the grocery store or eating. So you could go, okay, rather than cheese puffs, which I do love, I'm going to switch to tortilla chips when I go get lunch, for example. So they're just corn, maybe they're fried in oil, but that's okay, they're yummy, and I can have some salsa with it, Great lycopenes in tomatoes, awesome. And then about consistent medication routine, this is something to discuss with your doctor. You should never make alterations to your medications on your own. In addition, medications and diet actually can affect each other. For example, if you are on a birth control pill and you like grapefruit juice, talk to your doctor. Grapefruit juice can actually prevent your birth control from being as effective. So you might go, yeah, I need to talk to my doctor. Maybe I can add some prune juice in and make sure that I can still take my medications, but I still feel healthy. All right, I added this in late because I feel like we need a little bit more I do. Let's put it this way. So when I step into the store, I'm usually like, I just need to get things into my basket. I just need to get nutrients that will keep me moving and keep me going. But sometimes you might forget that some foods can be a little bit more beneficial because of how simple they are. So when we're considering ultra-processed, processed, and minimally processed, just read through this on your own, you will notice that at the end of that list, there are things like the plain yogurt, the plain fruit, for example, that can be just as delicious as the ultra-processed, but may benefit our microbiome much more because your microbiome isn't having to sift through all of those extra chemicals. All right. These are resources that will be sent out with the video, so you'll see hyperlinks, but they will work. And then I would very, very much encourage you to click on that psychobiotic diet research paper because I want to send them a love letter. These researchers put all of their methods, they put the assessments they did, they put the diet tricks, they put the recipes they gave these patients in this document, and it is available for free. You don't always get that with researchers. Sometimes they can be a little keepsies. There will be just some links to get you started if you're wondering about where do I start with heart-healthy exercises. Hopkins is great. We'll send over some sleep resources. All of these are free, by the way. Don't have to pay for any of them. There'll be the NOVA food classification system, which I discussed about that, ultra-processed versus minimally processed, and then just a couple tips and tricks on dietary and mental health support resources. So thank you all for your attention and dealing with my exuberance, and I would love to take questions. Yes. Mm-hmm. So the first question was thoughts about corporations that hire scientists to do studies. For example, the Coca-Cola Corporation is a big one in this. The second question, it was, you're gonna have to remind me the second one.
Have you ever been a
yeah.
been hired by
Yes. So the second question is whether I've been hired. So the answer to the first, I will keep. Oh no. I'm judging myself because I feel this internal rage at the very idea. So many scientists, there are wonderful scientists that no matter what question they are given, they will do their utmost to answer that question with rigorous scientific ethics. But unfortunately, that isn't everyone. So my personal thoughts on this is that it is a system that, first of all, sets up scientists to fail. It sets scientists up to possibly take bribes. It sets up a situation in which you, the consumer, are being told something that is fundamentally not true. And so as far as your second question, no, I have never worked for any of these corporations, nor would I, unless they were in good standing with having produced rigorous research that was then checked, validated, etc. And as all of us scientists know, sometimes there is a little bit of joy in giving negative data, of going, yeah, you promised that this diet was going to do X, Y, and Z. It did not. Excellent question, thank you. Yes. So the question was thoughts on fiber supplements versus perhaps foods rich in fiber, and then supplements that may come in gummy form or alternative forms. Unfortunately, there hasn't been good research put out about this, and part of it might be said corporations may not want there to be research put out about it. It could be an issue with funding as well. Some of us may know very well how difficult it is to get a research program funded when there might be very little money out there for it. So part of this will be my personal thoughts, just understanding the supplements, but as far as specific citations, there's very little out there. So first of all, there is a trend where our microbiome naturally adapts better to things it's familiar with, and perhaps this could be linked to it evolving with us. It's always going to have the easiest time recognizing, oh, that's a piece of broccoli. Versus with a supplement that's been stripped down to bare bones, it might, for example, when it's kind of taken into the mouth, swallowed, goes into the GI system, the gut may be going, oh, I know this is a component, but why is there so much of it around? And why is it not bound to this and that? What am I supposed to do with it? So that's not saying that one may be better for the other. We have some patients that must take fiber supplements to prevent things like severe constipation. But it always is a good idea to experiment with what about a little bit more of this, a little bit less of this, and finding that nice balance. To give another example is that, for example, let's take magnesium supplements, which are wonderful. So magnesium, there's multiple forms. When I'm talking about magnesium, I'm not talking about magnesium citrate. That is a laxative that will get things to move through your system very quickly. I'm talking about, for example, magnesium glycinate, which is very good for your brain. The gut, when it senses a large amount of magnesium, it's actually going to lower the absorption rate. It's going, whoa, that's way too much, because magnesium can actually interface with neurotransmitter systems. So obviously you don't want to be messing around with the way your neurons communicate. So for example, if you're taking a giant pill, which they come in some sizes, your body may not be absorbing that, versus if you're eating things like pumpkin seeds, for example, which are very enriched with magnesium, your body's going to go, oh, it's fixed to these components. It can break it down over time as it's moving through the gut, and you actually might get that magnesium absorbed. Second question was, for example, gummies versus others. There's actually some research, let's just take vitamins in general, that vitamins may not have as big of an impact as they're advertised to be. So we don't actually know if maybe some of this is getting absorbed into our gut, or if it's in such an artificial form, our gut's going, I don't recognize it, move it along. But the more the merrier. If someone is having a difficult time with nutrition, pick the format that's the easiest to remember. For example, like you could have someone who takes their medications, their prescription medications every morning, and they have their vitamin right there with their prescription medications, and maybe they can buy the little bit of the nicer version, but the nicer version does come as a hardened capsule. Versus someone else who, that's not in their routine, they don't take prescription medications, but they see that gummy pill bottle on their counter, and they're like, oh, I like those, I'll take some. So it's really supplementing as many forms as possible, and in ways that are attainable with your current lifestyle. So the question was how to differentiate between different types of cravings, some that may be that emotional seeking, that comfort, or a symptom of dysbiosis, versus the other maybe my body's like, I need water, or I need protein in order to build muscle. It is really hard to tell between the two. The one difference, let's say you have a pretty consistent routine. I exercise Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday pretty heavily at the gym. I'm walking throughout. My life's pretty consistent. Maybe I have some stress that's just innate in my life, but everything seems to be about the same. And this might be a point to start having a nutrition diary where you're talking about, like, in the mornings, like, oh, I was really craving bacon this morning, for example. Or at the end of the day, I was really craving chocolate. And then perhaps when that balanced life or that consistency starts to waver, you're looking back and you're going, oh, when I had that test, I suddenly started craving soda more, for example. Caffeine, sugar, all of that. So you'll start to build a word bank of, okay, when things are nice and consistent, I know what my body needs, versus, at that other point in time where things are not consistent, maybe I'm doing more of those seeking cravings. It's never perfect to tell the difference between the two, but you might build an understanding between you and your body when one craving might be one type versus another. Does that answer your question? So this summary is that we're figuring out like what those foods are, what those signals are, emergency signals that our brain is sending, and being able to recognize them in real time. Oh, I got 4 at once. Let's do one by one, starting right there.
Okay, so yogurt is beneficial for the microbiome, and I would assume that plain yogurt is better than those sugar-filled yogurts. But my question is, you could choose whole fat yogurt, low fat, or non-fat. Does that have any difference on the microbiome?
Oh, absolutely. So there are the microbes in our gut are influenced by the types of fats that we consume, for example. So things like trans fats can actually negatively affect our microbiome. So with regards to your question, I'm a little biased, I will say, primarily because when it comes to fats, we are a society that for a long time has been bombarded with this message of low fat, low fat, low fat, and actually high sugar, high sugar, high sugar, which we're now finding is the opposite. So obviously there will be patients with different dietary needs. For example, there may be patients where they need that low fat for weight loss or for other requirements. But generally that whole fat is giving you nutrients that are essential for your body. So people tend to focus on the calories and they tend to forget that fats are really good for us. So I would say that in a perfect world, the normalized fat content, that whole, is generally better, but we don't live in a perfect world. Now, one thing I will mention just to follow up on that is that I get questions like, what brands are good, what brands aren't good? Brands are brands are brands. They all are probably owned by the same person at the end of that food chain if we keep going up and up. You don't need to buy organic. That's not something you should be focusing on unless you have the energy to, unless you would prefer to buy all organic, but it's not going to be the make or break between your GI system being happy or not. All right, did that answer your question? Ooh.
That's really good.
All right, PSA, savory yogurt, walnuts, and salt. So I'll try it. Okay, perfect. I'm going to go around. I'll get to you, yes. Science has a problem. 2 problems. Well, many problems. All right, big problem is, first of all, yes, sometimes we are limited in who we can sample, and those college students see $20 to sign up for something, and they are in, versus, later on in life, you're like, 2 hours for $20? Nah, that's not worth it. So yes, there are some papers that one of the critical failures was that they're only sampling from a very limited population. That is now being recognized by the powers that be who are giving us the money and are saying, we are going to reject your grant application if you do not control for this. Another big issue is gender. So a lot of studies, especially in the pharmacological community, are done with male mice only. So toxicity screens are done only with males and not on females, and it's been going that way for years. My research, we couldn't control for the estrous cycles in the mice, and I was forced to submit papers to massive epilepsy journals, and I had to admit this is limited because I only got boys. So absolutely, this is something that science has been suffering for a while, but it is being corrected. And with these papers that are coming out, they are looking at scoping populations. We're actually seeing a lot of meta-analyses that are coming out, but they'll never be perfect. So for example, which one was it? I may have to go through it, but was it the population study? Usually I can pull this off the top of my head. But there is a study that I cited where they mentioned in their discussion section that it was difficult to find individuals because they had to eliminate so many variables. So they're looking for the needle in the haystack. I have to have a patient that doesn't have this and doesn't have this and doesn't have this, and it can be just sometimes hard to find those individuals. So that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, hold on. Did you have a question? Okay. First of all, there isn't enough research, and it needs to come out quickly. So I will say that that is actually a question that I don't feel comfortable answering because I don't have enough research that I've been able to digest about it yet. I am keeping my eyes peeled. It's great you brought it up on the Google Scholar Alerts. I have that on Google Scholar Alerts so that hopefully I'll know a little bit more. But this is where I'll have to be. The question was about certain drugs related to GLP and mood, for example. GLP. Okay, that was you, and then I'll get to you. Yes. So with the Mediterranean diet, so the samples that have been traditionally taken from, these are, for example, like populations in Italy and Greece, for example, where alcohol is part of their culture.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah. So they have wine with dinner. Actually, children can drink diluted wine at the dinner table, for example. They use wine in their cooking, which is absolutely delicious. We are figuring out now that, obviously, well, we've known for a while that high levels of alcohol consumption can be bad for us, but there's some scientists that are saying certain components, and for example, red wine are excellent for us. It's very unique to the individual, though, and then we have to consider things like if addiction runs in the family, etc. Alcohol, absolutely, for when we're considering, let's take red wine as the example, does have some wonderful compounds within it, and it is a fermented product. But let's consider all of us as individuals. So some of us may have kidney disease that run in the family, may have liver disease, or you could actually have an anatomical difference that may make your organs work a little bit harder. And then if you are consuming alcohol, it's going to affect you more than Daisy Jane over here, whose father drank like a fish and lived to 99. So it's understanding how that alcohol affects you. I would recommend, I'm not an MD, as you guys saw up there, MS, PhD, I'm not a doctor, but if I were you, I would get blood tests done every year. I would harp your doctor until you can see your kidney function, your liver function, your thyroid. I have a lot of patients, well, I had, back when I worked at the brain injury clinic, had a lot of patients who would be tired, their faces would be swollen, they'd have dark circles under their eyes, and I would go, obviously you're not feeling well, has your doctor done a blood draw? And they'd be like, no, why would they do that? So it's always good to have a baseline, especially if you might get a disease. Having that baseline will help you with insurance if something goes wrong. So the question was about what kind of studies are considered good studies, and then what journals are considered good journals. So typically, yes, the double-blind study is considered the pinnacle. It's not always possible. So never judge a paper if they're not able to do that double-blind. So to give you an example, let's all pretend we're scientists for a moment. And I'm a scientist, and I want to set up an experiment where that psychobiotic experiment, where I want to see if my diet works. I want to see if my diet lowers perceived stress. Well, I can't just give the patients the diet and go, well, you're on the psychobiotic and you're not, because psychologically, there could be maybe even a placebo effect or a nocebo effect. So I could have patients that are going, well, I'm getting worse because I'm not on the psychobiotic diet. So immediately you have to blind the population. They don't know what they're getting. They are simply working with those individuals that are helping coach them and giving them those tips. And secondarily, I, as the scientist, cannot know who's who. We are all biased. Whether we like it or not, it is inherent in our brains, our nervous systems, and our bodies. So me as the researcher, I need to be handed that data, and I need to have no idea who's who when I'm doing the end evaluation. So that's a double-blind study. Again, the pinnacle, not always possible. As far as journals, when you're looking at journals, what you want to look is called the impact factor of that journal. So the higher the impact journal, generally the better rated that journal is, the higher quality of the research. In addition, and I'll put this actually on the resources page when it gets sent out, we need to be aware of predatory journals. So there are actually scientific journals that will either take crap science or will publish things that are inherently incorrect, and there are lists available online. So I very much suggest, especially when it comes to social media, sometimes there's a citation under something and you're going, but that seems too good to be true. Like okay, that eating like completely natural, not pasteurized milk is gonna make me a superhero? I don't think that's true. So go look at that journal article, look on that list of predatory journals, and you're probably going to find that journal's name listed. Yes, so the question was about certain supplements marketed to certain populations with mental health disorders. I am on the fence. A lot of these do not have good rigorous science out on them. So, and this includes a lot of diets too. So there are once researchers or doctors that are saying, here is the microbiome diet. It's like, that's all well and good. It sounds fine, but where are my citations? Where are my double blinds? Unfortunately, we live in a society where if somebody's wanting to make money, they're going to tell you anything to your face to get that money. So as an individual, I would never ascribe to any of those supplements unless they can go, someone et al. Published this, it was validated by et al., and it is being used in X, Y, and Z hospital, for example. That's how I would decide there. Yes. Did that answer your question? Okay. So the first question was about microbiome tests that are becoming much more popular, and the second is about kind of variability and cycles of food, eating broccoli on Monday and Tuesday and then having cabbage Wednesday and Thursday, and whether there could be benefits from changing that up. So to address the first question, there are a slew of tests coming out, and yet again, not a lot of them are not supported by science. However, and this is something that I'll include on the resource list, there actually is government-funded research coming out about a very specific test. I don't know if they've named it yet, but there may be a certified, FDA-approved, clinically used test coming out within the next 5 years. So I'll share as much information as I've gotten so far about that. So my answer to that would be, a lot of the tests out there right now are not trustable, but we may in the future have some well-supported tests that come out. That doesn't mean that the tests that you take are useless. It simply means that they may not have, and this is a critical issue that's, for example, happening with some of the genetic tests, is that they may not have enough samples to be able to go, is this good or bad? So a big issue with, for example, some of the genetic tests is they didn't have enough individuals of Native American origin that were participating, and there was this huge empty black hole. Sometimes the algorithm would be going, well, you have Native American history, but they didn't actually have enough samples, maybe 1 or 2 people to actually be able to say that. So it's very similar with the microbiome in that some of their population control and their methodology may not be quite up to snuff. To answer your second question, what you can get is great. So for example, a lot of us may shop on the weekends, and then we may get, let's say I put into my shopping cart my chicken breast, my broccoli, my Snickers bar, my kombucha, maybe a, one of those little oat cafe lattes in a can, just because I'm craving it that day. And I put those into my shopping cart. And then I go home, and then I'm like, okay, well, it's going to be broccoli and chicken Monday and Tuesday. But then I may, for example, I don't know, let's say that I look in my pantry, and I'm like, I ran out of the chicken and broccoli. I really didn't plan well. Oh, I've got canned tomatoes. And then in the fridge, I've got frozen spinach. And I eat maybe some nice soup for the next couple of days. That's perfect. It's what you can do. It's what you bought for. It's what you have in your pantry. They're all whole foods, canned, frozen, whatever you can get. The issue might come about, let's say, especially with certain individuals with dietary preferences, et cetera, or with very, very small accommodations, so they may not be able to eat a lot of foods, is that if you are eating chicken and broccoli every single day, then you are missing out on complex nutrients that are available and bioavailable in other foods. So making sure that you're working within your, your ability, but also making sure that, okay, I bought broccoli like 4 times in a row. Let's try cauliflower, because I know I can handle it. Let's add in some carrots to that broccoli dish. Let's, chicken's all well and good, but chicken breast doesn't have a lot of fat in it. Let's maybe make a curry with yogurt and chicken thighs. So diversifying in that way, and all of these things are actually, well, here in California, they're a wee bit more expensive than they are for me in the country of New York. But also making sure that they're within your price point, and you don't have to buy the leanest beef from this tiny little farm in Northern California. No, buy what you can, buy what works for you. Does that answer your question? And I could talk forever about that, but it's something where I've actually changed my classroom style. Because there are many of us who are living with hidden conditions or so-called invisible diseases where we present as normal, when in fact, even attending a talk like this might be quite a struggle and maybe exhausting for hours after. It may cause a migraine. You may need to kind of cave and not be socially active, and other people are like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And they're pushing and pushing, and you're just like, my brain is maxed. It has been filled up. It needs to empty before I can have a conversation. And so the question there was just kind of commenting on the effects of brain injury on sensory perception and filtering through that thalamus. I don't take probiotics. I do eat a large amount of fermented foods. I do like them. Let's put it this way. Simply because of my views on, as a scientist, recommending or not recommending, I tend to not even discuss any brands, etc., because I don't think it's responsible of me to do that. But I do recommend for individuals that are investigating possible supplements to discuss them with your doctor and to never trust the reviews on the website. Yes. Did that answer your question? Yeah. So the question was about cesarean births and children developing and actually having more allergies and issues, possibly because they weren't exposed to the mother's microbiome. If you breastfed even a little bit, the baby's going to get some of that microbiome through the colostrum, etc. But for new parents, and this is something that some doctors, especially maybe doctors in their elder years, who may not keep up with the research, they may squint at you and go, well. But some doctors now will actually, or nurses, will receive consent from the patient and talk to them about this beforehand, but actually collect samples from the vaginal canal and then smear it all over the kid so that they get exposed. Yeah, and it's really simple. It is safe. So those are options that are now appearing in labor and delivery. As far as supporting the child on later in life, that tends to be something you need to communicate with your pediatrician because, for example, you don't want to be giving your child peanuts when obviously they're having a reaction to peanuts. There is good research about getting them exposed to the outdoors, though. So the more we're finding now that children that are just exposed to stuff, they're sticking things in their mouth, they're falling in the dirt, they're getting scratched, that is good for them. It is building up their immune system. It's building up their microbiome. So if you're the type of parent that has the kid that comes home who's like, hey, Mom, I might have licked an earthworm and they've got scratches, you're doing it right. Does that answer your question? Yes. So the question was testing microbiome through something like, for example, blood work. So currently a lot of the tests that are done are actually fecal tests that they will do. So as far as blood work, the only thing that they might be able to look at is, for example, like lipids to make sure that's in balance. That can sometimes be an indicator. But overall, they haven't developed a good blood test to look at, for example, metabolites produced by those commensals. It would be incredible. I mean, imagine going into your doctor and they draw blood, boom, you've got everything, but we aren't quite there yet. So does that answer your question? A lot of it is symptomology. So with this, with the state of the science as it is, a lot of it is kind of keeping lists, understanding your body, which I'm going to be honest, takes a lot of work. It's exhausting. So the scientists need to get their butt in gear, me included. All right, anybody else? So the question was about protein sources, animals versus more vegan, for example, plant-based. So there are plenty of places to get proteins on a vegan diet that are minimally processed. Lentils, beans, tofu, and I'm going to be honest, at least at my supermarket, beans in a can are one of the cheapest things that make a really good chili, really quick meal. I mean, you can even microwave it if you want. You can put it on tacos. So I very much, in my own lifestyle, my husband and I always have bags of lentils around. We always have beans in cans. So for example, one dish that we make might be, and this is actually, my mom found this and I love it. So it's a dish where you get kale and you massage that kale with lemon juice and you put some pesto in it and then you drain and rinse butter beans and you throw that in with some pepper and salt. Oh, it is so good. And it's very high in fiber, very high in protein. Now, so that we talked about kind of sources and the values of plant-based proteins. We are omnivores. We eat meat. We've eaten meat, but if you don't eat meat, then wonderful for you. You're actually helping our environment quite a lot with the state that things are in. Animal proteins are also very good for us. Animal fats are very good for us in moderation and depending on where you get them. Unfortunately, some animal meats, for example, if you think about the fattier steaks or the fattier hamburgers, when they're going through the process of cooking, you might actually create trans fats. You might get a reactive oxygen species that can actually be bad for you and your gut. So paying attention to what cut of meat you are getting, where it's coming from, and then how you're cooking it is all important to make sure that you're getting the benefits of that protein and not the downsides sometimes. Does that answer your question? Oh, yes, thank you. So the question was about hormones being put into, for example, animals that we are then going to consume. First of all, there isn't enough research. I feel like I say that multiple times during every presentation I get. Let me answer in a little bit of an abstract way, and then I'll give you my personal feelings, which you can disregard in any way you want. So we are finding now that, for example, hormones pumped into animals, hormones that we might be ingesting in the form of birth control are actually making it into our groundwater. We have fish that are changing genders because of how much is getting into the groundwater. So innately within that, there's the appreciation of putting things where they weren't before. Making a chicken the size of a beach ball may not be healthy. I actually had a pet chicken who was a meat chicken. The poor thing couldn't stand up. She would fall down. She was the sweetest thing ever. But you could tell that she had not been bred to live long, and she didn't, nor had she been bred to serve any other function than as food. So there's that conclusion, which is we have anecdotal evidence pointing to pumping anything full of unnatural compounds is not good for the environment in general, and thus is probably not good for us. However, there hasn't been discrete research showing that this antibiotic or this hormone or this thing is going to cause this result in humans. That's not discussed enough and it's not published on enough, so I can't definitively say blank et al. Has shown that hormones pumped into this chicken are going to lead to our children, having puberty earlier, for example. But in general, it's always good to avoid things that we do not, that may not be natural to the situation. But again, I buy chicken. I'm a poor academic. I buy chicken that sometimes is raised with antibiotics. When my husband and I aren't, for example, like when there's not farmers markets, when they're selling that free-range chicken at really discounted prices. So I know that was kind of a non-answer, but did I help a little bit? Okay. All right, yes. So the question was about colonoscopies and that process. Naturally, they want to remove things from your gut so they can see what might be going wrong. So with the process of the colonoscopy, it's not as detrimental to the microbiome as antibiotics would. So those microbes are going to try to cling for dear life as things move through. And they do a pretty good job because you have that mucus layer. So they're actually able to embed themselves. You will end up excreting quite a lot of those microbes, but because they're microbes, they repopulate really quickly. So it doesn't so much act as a reset for the microbiome as it much just be a reset for what's in your gut, for example, just the food matter that was there to begin with. And I think the follow-up, the concept you posed was about GI conditions, possibly. So, I'm trying to think about how to summarize an answer there, but the colonoscopy, they're antibiotics. might either exacerbate symptoms of a pre-existing GI condition, or they may relieve them depending on how they're acting on the gut. So for example, let's say an antibiotic, antibiotics are actually used for SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So it clears everything out, and then you actually work with your doctor to rebuild your microbiome. So in that case, the antibiotics are good, they're serving a purpose. But in another case, you might have a patient with autism spectrum disorder who already has GI issues, and then you have them go on that antibiotic, and then it disrupts things even further. So it's hard to know, and it's a case-by-case basis. But again, the moral of the story there is that the antibiotics are going to be a lot harder in your system. They're going to actually really kill those microbes versus a colonoscopy is just whoosh. Does that answer your question?
We have time for probably one more question.
Okay, yes. Yeah, so it's a minimally invasive surgery. So they're often implanted right here. The main body of the device sits under the skin right here, and then the wires run up. So remember, we were humming and gargling. This is a main point for that vagus nerve and how to activate it. And then I could talk forever about it. They're really, really neat. But they send signals to that vagus nerve, and they need to be modulated. So for example, sometimes with the vagus nerve stimulator, patients will experience a change in their voice. And I get really raspy or deep or inconsistent, and that's a cosmetic issue that we may want to adjust the settings. The doctor can literally just scan with the device and know about the settings, change the settings. They can look at activity. It's amazing, the technology we have now. They don't work for everyone though. So for some patients, it's an adjuvant, it's an add-on to the medications that they're already taking. For some patients, they may eventually get it removed because it's just not working. That would be an epileptologist or a neurologist that you'd be working with if you have seizures to discuss that device. Yeah. It's not, they have TENS units, which can be used to activate vagus nerves. Those are external devices. Some people with migraines use them. But a VNS, vagal nerve stimulator, is only installed currently for epilepsy patients under the direction of their neurologist or their epileptologist. All right. Okay, thank you, everyone. Wonderful questions. Have a great time.
Thank you all for attending, and especially Dr. Jaycie for sharing her knowledge and expertise. I think we'll be hearing a lot more about this topic as the research evolves, and especially, as you all know, mental health is becoming such a huge issue in our society. So you gave us some great nuggets to go home with, so thank you so much. And